Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring the topics of music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and creative process. I'm your host, Robbie Burns, and with me this week is music technology educator, blogger, and author, Ethan Hein. I was just thinking, I think the last time we spoke was in a Noodle Cat in Cleveland.
Oh, yeah?
I don't know if you remember that.
That's funny.
Like three years ago, maybe?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Did you know that Noodle Cat is no more?
Oh, no.
I don't know how fondly you remember Noodle Cat. It was only my second time at the establishment.
Yeah, quite fondly.
You can't find the broth that sticks to the noodles quite like that too many places. Well, I don't know. I haven't spent a lot of time in Cleveland. Definitely not anywhere near me.
Okay.
Well, let me ask you this. What sort of a meta discussion here? Are you recording your end of this audio in Ableton Live?
I am.
And what do you is there a long list of things that you would love to see come to Ableton Live that in 10 years from now you think would propel you? What is it that keeps people upgrading these systems? Because I am more than happy hitting the record button with a decent microphone plugged into. I'm running in Logic right now just because most of my audio right now is podcasting, but I just can't think of much that I would love it to do that isn't super geared towards one very, very specific need that probably only I have.
Yeah. My production practice is kind of reactive to whatever I get. I'm not really pushing the envelope of Ableton. I'm pretty much just oh boy, presets. I wasn't sitting there thinking I need a wavetable synth until they gave me one. And now I have it. I'm oh, it's awesome. But yeah, I'm not on the bleeding edge. You know what I mean? I guess, what I would like to have is flats. It would be nice if in the preferences you could toggle between universal sharps and universal flats. I don't love thinking in the key of A sharp in the MIDI piano roll.
Is that still a thing in Ableton? I haven't used it in a couple of months. Okay.
Yep. And I last year I went on Twitter and complained about master slave in the MIDI settings, and apparently a bunch of people had been complaining about that, and they were talking about it internally, and in Live 10 it no longer says master slave. Now it says leader follower. So that's awesome. But I also did a bunch of complaining about flats and sharps, and apparently no one else is complaining about that. So
that's a surprise.
Yeah.
I'm equally surprised and impressed that they made that change, that they are reactive to that feedback.
Oh, they're very reactive. Part of what I like about the company, I've gotten to know a bunch of people over there over the years, and oh yeah, they are paying attention,
Before we get too far, is there any way you would love to, is there any sort of summary that in more or less words you would give to someone listening about precisely who it is that you are and what it is that you do with Ableton?
Sure. So, I'm somebody who was kind of a feral, raised by wolves pop musician for many years. I was, playing in rock bands and playing in country bands, and recording and producing my own stuff, and recording and producing other people's stuff, in my apartment, and sometimes in studios, but mostly in my apartment, and doing some musical theater and a little video scoring and just pretty much whatever I could find to do. And then went to grad school in my 30s and got a master's degree in music technology at NYU. With the goal of ending up at a software company. I wanted to make the tools that I was using for production, and discovered that I'm a much better teacher than computer programmer, and ended up getting offered adjunct jobs, adjunct professor jobs, and then was oh, I guess I'm doing this now, and am now getting a PhD so I can get an actual professor job.
That's interesting to hear you say that you want to make the tools. I feel like a theme, one of the things I want to touch on today is what the tools are, and sort of I don't know if recursive is the word I'm looking for, but sort of like how the tools inspire the creative process and how the creative process then in turn inspires the tools that we have. I mean, something you had posted that we were going back and forth on Twitter about recently was the Ableton Push as an input device.
Yeah.
And I didn't read like all of the response you got from that. It seems like when someone, I would imagine that when someone posts like a divisive idea, like, hey, what would it be like if we just stripped out all the, piano keyboards in the music tech lab and put Ableton Push everywhere? Like, what would happen? It seems to me like just from the limited reading of response to stuff you have done on Facebook and Twitter that there aren't a whole lot of people who don't have just one extreme idea or the other extreme idea as a response to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't have like a vendetta against the piano keyboard. Like, so in grad school, I took a composition seminar with Morton Subotnick, who I love very much as a human being, and he was like a very inspiring and thought-provoking figure. I can't say I'm that crazy about his music, but as an educator, he's really wonderful, and he loathes the piano keyboard. Like, he feels like we've just all been in this box for hundreds of years because of it, and wants us to like in his seminar, like, you use like a Buchla synth and you are forbidden from using MIDI or any kind of piano keyboard interface. Like, you got to do everything from the oscillators up. And I don't feel that strongly about it. But I do feel like, the piano keyboard is super wonderful for particular applications and not as wonderful for other applications,
Yeah, this is interesting. So the closest I can relate to this is while my primary bread and butter is I'm a middle school band director, I do in my schedule teach a general music class. And we actually began piloting a program at my school about a year ago where it's the first time that this program has been conceived of as a year-long and an everyday class. It's for 7th and 8th grade students. So if they choose they want to take it, the idea, this is not how it's happened in practice so far, but the idea is that a 7th grader could take the class again in 8th grade and build upon the skills.
Oh, cool.
Which is very cool. Whether or not we have the technological tools that we need to make this class really awesome is another story for another time. But what is fascinating to me is like trying to reconcile all these different curricular ideas that our county has. On the one hand, the curriculum is sort of thought of like in strands, like keyboard skill, guitar skill, percussion skill, and music technology skill, which is just a wacko way, I think, to look at curriculum. I mean, it's certainly performance-based. We could get into that if you want, but I think at its core is this priority in my district to teach piano and guitar skill, which means that in the limited access we have to something like GarageBand, there's no better way to tailor what we've built upon other than to just teach them how to use input with a piano keyboard.
Sure.
So where, to me, the ideal situation is an awareness and to embrace all possible tools, which is, I think, is where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But the idea is like, and I run into this very often is, my students' piano skills are not very good. And
no.
the way that I teach it that sort of makes sense from a sequencing standpoint is to start, and this is from both theoretical and a technical standpoint. To me, it makes a lot of sense to start in the key of C, but the key of C is not a tonal area that a lot of the music they're already familiar with is based around, particular a major tonality.
Yeah.
So this is a hard thing to reconcile when we get into the music tech lab.
Well, I mean, if you're going to be on the white keys, I mean, there's always like Mixolydian and Aeolian, right? Like, I actually kind of like starting on Aeolian because it's also like in alphabetical order, and it like maps onto stuff that's familiar. And Mixo too. Like, frankly, like I feel like Mixo is just like easier on the brain than straight major if you have like never heard of anything before. But I mean, that runs in the face of like all the textbooks and all the standards, and yeah, it's kind of an uphill climb.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's going to be hard. It's going to be a long road to sort of like rip the rug out from underneath of us. I mean, the resource, and this is, I think, kind of what gets into a little bit. I want to talk about this book that you're currently in the process of writing. But we have so many in education. We have so many traditions and resources that have been built up underneath of us to support a very, very specific and tailored kind of musical instruction, which is 99% of the reason why I feel very confident teaching in a fairly traditional, like my 2 band classes they operate, in a fairly traditional manner that you would expect. It's just so difficult to completely like reinvent the wheel.
Sure.
There's repertoire that is written for exactly the instrumentation. Those instruments are accessible to us. The local repair shops repair those instruments the best. I could go on and on and on. So like with something like a push is an ultimately flexible input tool in that it is just like, it's hard to deny a grid of rubber squares.
Right.
So when you're starting from the beginning, let's say because you're not only are you currently writing a book, but you're developing a music theory curriculum, right?
Yeah.
So where do you begin with someone who has no knowledge of the 12 major key areas and a piano keyboard?
So I'm I don't think there's like a single path up the mountain. But I do believe really strongly in like training the ears before the eyes, and using things like the MIDI piano roll, and using, so in all the iOS apps, right, and all the synth apps, you can like set the keyboard to just play whatever combination of notes. Like there'll be like on the Animoog app, right, or Thumb Jam or Figure, any of them, you can say, okay, I would like the keyboard to only show the notes in, F sharp Mixolydian mode, and then there's no wrong notes, right?
Right.
And I love those things. Love them, both for pedagogical purposes and also for expressive purposes. Like, I know what notes are in F sharp Mixolydian, but it's very liberating to be able to just like turn my brain off and just like pretend I'm 5 years old and I'm in that kind of Zen beginner's mind state, But so, yeah, I'm planning to do like a lot of this kind of oral, like figuring stuff out, writing tunes. I'm planning to spend like 2/3 of the semester doing that, and we're going to get into notation after that. By which point, hopefully, like what a major scale is, what a minor scale is, what a chord is, will already be in everyone's ears. And if people are coming in there with, prior like music theory background or piano or whatever, and they want to do the whole class in notation, that's fine. But for the first 2/3 of the year, people can submit their assignments as audio, as MIDI, as note flight scores, just whatever format they are kind of most comfortable working in, until we treat notation as a subject unto itself.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting having studied both Western, when are we going to think of a better word for Western music theory? Having studied that and also jazz theory formally, it's hard to articulate how different an experience the two are. I mean, jazz, for all its complexity, is taught primarily through the ear. And that was, although the jazz, I think I have a much better grasp of the complexity of jazz harmony than I do anything like from 20th century romantic classical era, Western classical music, whatever you want to lump into that category. I feel much more confident with the jazz, and I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that you're always listening and playing things with and for each other from the very, very first. Like, nothing is disassociated from its sound.
Well, and I mean, my understanding of like the history of classical pedagogy is that, like, back in the era of the canonical composers, that is how they were working, right? Like, I mean, obviously they were working on the page, but like they were doing a lot more improvising, in the 18th and 19th centuries, and they were doing probably a lot more kind of oral work, and this was in a less formal kind of one-on-one tutoring situation, rather than kind of at scale in schools. But yeah, I do feel like this sort of textualization of music is more about the demands of institutions than the demands of music, right?
Yeah, so interesting. So when you're developing this curriculum, how do you? Well, let me actually bounce back to what you just said for a second. What do you like? I don't even know how to ask this. How what would a thrilling and exciting, like if you just took the freshman first semester theory class that most people are teaching with figured bass and counterpoint, like what would like a thrilling and exciting version of that class look like to you, or would you consider what you have designed to be a thrilling and exciting version of that?
I hope what I've designed is going to. So, I this thing that we're talking about is a class is fundamentals of Western music at the New School, which is a class that's been in existence for many years. But the guy who teaches it is going on sabbatical, and I'm replacing him for a year. And they like invited me to like substantially redesign it because they're finding that people are just not retaining stuff into future classes. And they're open to new approaches and things, and they're the New School. They're always open to new approaches. Yeah. God bless them. So we'll see. We'll see how this stuff plays out in practice. But I mean, a lot of my approach just comes from my own experience of primarily self-teaching this stuff. I did study jazz a little bit in college, but most of my knowledge of music comes from just like sitting at the guitar and figuring it out. And so a lot of the approach comes from like asking what the goal is, right? Because I don't see music theory as like a valuable thing in and of itself. Like it's valuable insofar as it gives you the ability to do other things. And the main, for me, like the important goal is it gives you the ability to like make your own music, to write and improvise. Yeah. And so pretty much what the students are going to do all semester is just write. I can't force them to improvise because they're not all jazz people, but if they want to do their writing by recording improvisation, that's fine with me. And so that helps to really clarify like what should you cover, right? I'm presuming that, I will see who they are when they get into the room, but I'm presuming that they're going to be writing in techno, hip hop, rock, metal. Some of them are going to be writing contemporary classical type stuff. Some of them are going to be doing jazz, whatever it is that they're doing. That's the set of concepts that we should be addressing. So something like figured bass or like species counterpoint, like if you want to specialize in the compositional techniques of the 18th century, you should definitely learn those things. But otherwise, I think teaching that stuff does more harm than good. It's like this mass of arcane rules that is so stylistically specific and is either kind of irrelevant or actively wrong for writing other kinds of music. And so like I feel like there's historical value in teaching it, but like not in music theory class and like music history class, right?
I guess that depends on the scope of the class. How many semesters of it are you taking? What is your major? I certainly feel like it would be hard for me to let go of the 3 semesters I did of, we took the ancient music class and the classical romantic class and then the 20th century class, but they don't let you take them in that order because you're not mature enough to take new music or old music until you've got classical, which is the way that the University of Maryland thought of it.
Most places
is strange and bizarre to me. I wouldn't want to remove any of that from maybe the sequence at which I learned it could have helped me understand it better. But I think that's exactly kind of what you're going for. There's definitely like a sequence and a balance that for, I don't know what your students are all majoring in. It could be a variety of things, I suppose. But like, there's got to be a way to survey a greater breadth of harmonic and melodic and rhythmic material that does not sort of look at everything. Like I was reading earlier this morning, I was reading your Country Road blog post. And when you were talking about where the tonal center is, it struck me as like how biased I am by the music theory that I've studied at a formal level. Like someone who's taken like a classical, you know what I mean? Like it's very easy to be thinking about like, well, how is the leading tone functioning? Like how is the dominant chord functioning? Right. And that's just not necessarily the starting point that you should have.
Yeah, you don't have to go very far to find music that like doesn't follow the rules of Western tonal harmony. Black music, like sometimes it does follow it, and a lot of the time it doesn't. And, so I come from like rock and roll before anything else. And in rock and roll, like the major scale is kind of an exotic sound, right? Like blues and mixolydian are kind of the default sounds. And like, there's just not a lot of leading tones. Like there's 5 chords, but they don't necessarily resolve to one any more often than they go somewhere else. There's very few leading tones in melodies. And like the function of the leading tone is very often taken by like flat 7 or flat 3, or, or something like that in rock. And that's coming from the blues. And like the blues is totally inexplicable in terms of Western music theory, right? But it doesn't sound strange to anybody. And so, yeah, I'm definitely like, if I have to throw some, 18th century European practice over the side to make room for the blues, that seems like a highly worthwhile, sacrifice to make.
Sure. In my history with jazz theory, I mean, certainly there's like a whole lot of that function, I guess, when you start to introduce the idea of a 2 and a 5 chord sort of substituting for something in the blues, but I don't think that's what you're talking about right now.
No, I mean, like the blues. I mean, like, they talk a lot about like, the 12 bar blues form and 1, 4, and 5, but like that's a subset of the blues, right? And a lot of blues music doesn't have chord changes at all. Yeah. And I actually think the 1, 4, and 5 is stuff that sort of got grafted onto it later in its development as it started to kind of blend into the American popular mainstream. But like, if you listen to like John Lee Hooker or Howlin Wolf, a lot of those tunes just are like, they're just E, right? And it's like E mixolydian or E major or E minor or all of the above or none of the above, but it's just E for however long. And there's no harmonic progression. Like there's no chords. I mean, there are chords, but they don't progress. And like, when you move into the popular music of the present, like, yeah, maybe you'll have like a 4 chord loop instead of like one mode to infinity. But I don't feel like that 4 chord loop is any more kind of functional or progressive than that 1 chord blues is from the 1930s or 40s, right?
Well, not any more functional, at least. I mean, certainly, a blues tune with 1 chord will still have form. It will still have a phrase, a movement to it, a direction that the harmony is going.
Right. It's just not coming from the chords. Yeah. It's coming from meter. Yeah.
Yeah. And so why start? Right. I get your point. Why start with a major scale when those concepts are there? But certainly, if the function can be analyzed and understood with regards to similar ideas in a major scale as it can in the blues.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, like European common practice tonality is very important and very pervasive, but it's certainly not like a skeleton key that unlocks every kind of Western music, much less, music from other parts of the world. So I would prefer to present it the way jazz theory presents it, as like, okay, here is a toolkit, and a very important and versatile one, but it's a toolkit. And when we get to the blues, you're going to need some different tools,
So do you start, like, kind of walk me through it? Like, do you start in those tonal areas, or do you start with Aeolian in this class curriculum?
So actually what we're gonna do is start with rhythm, and we're gonna spend probably a quarter to a third of the semester on it. So my approach to harmony, which is the one that I developed just kind of ad hoc, like playing rock and roll and all that stuff all those years, and only gained a formal vocabulary for more recently, comes from this guy Philip Tagg, who's an ethnomusicologist who studies popular music. And his assertion is, like, in loop-based music, which is basically everything, right, for the past 100 years, like in the popular realm, meter determines function, right? So if you have like a 4 chord loop, whatever chord is in the sort of metrically strong position is the tonic, regardless of what the content of any of the chords is. If you have like a 2 chord loop, then again, whatever is just in that metrically strong position is 1. And that to me has broad explanatory power, because you can, like, if the chords don't change at all, you can still use kind of metrical function and emphasis to sort of feel like tension and resolution, even if the chords don't actually change, right? So in like Chain of Fools by Aretha Franklin, it's just C minor for the whole tune. But there's definitely like tension and resolution in the tune is just all metrical. Right. Yeah. And then you can start to say, okay, like, and then once we start to move into larger forms that are bigger than 4-bar loops or 8-bar loops, okay, now like that's like a long enough unit that like the identity of the chords themselves starts to play more of a role than just metrical position. And so, okay, now let's talk about ways that these chords might function rather than they're just existing to kind of mark where you are in the loop. You know, and so from there, for sure, like diatonic harmony and, you know, dominance and subdominance is going to be an important conceptual toolkit. But we're also going to talk about like modal harmony and the blues. And I don't know, like, I mean, in terms of the sequence, it's like the sequence is less important to me than the emphasis, right? Or the idea of which of these things is more kind of valid. That like it just depends on like what style and era you're talking about.
So like in the example of the Country Road, because that's the one where it's kind of loosely in B major, but it's got centers a lot around G sharp. Is this like, can you like pull this out of your head if I just start talking about your post that I read this morning? Mm-hmm. By the way, I just heard this song for the first time like 2 weeks ago. Is that a shock
to really?
You? I feel like I probably have heard it before, but it's the kind of thing that now that I've heard it, I'm hearing it all the time, which means I must have been hearing it before.
But just not attentively, yeah. I think it's a fascinating piece of music. I'm going to gently correct you and say it's Old Town Road. Country Roads is, was that John Denver?
Why am I saying Country Road? Do you know why I'm saying Country Road? Is because Lynyrd, throughout all discussion about it, is it country or not? Old Town Road. So... Yeah. And so the idea here, yes, this like kind of genre bending, or I guess that's the question, right? Is like what genre of music is it or isn't it? But just to speak to the tonal element of it, I mean, yes, you're talking about this like I think the G sharp chord is the very first downbeat of the chord progression. Is that right?
Yeah, you know, and so by the philtag understanding, and I think like you know listener intuition would probably support that like the tune's in G sharp, yeah. So what are the chords? It's like G sharp 7, B, F sharp, E, I think is what the chords are. Although what's cool about it is that's the chord progression of the banjo sample. But then the bass line, which was added by the producer, Young Keo, actually doesn't agree with it. Like he just is kind of playing this like G sharp minor pentatonic line, and like under the F sharp chord, he's like playing some E, and under the E chord, he's playing some F sharp and some E also and some B. I don't know. It's interesting. Like it's like the bass line and the chords don't actually even agree with each other. So you sort of have this kind of gestalt of like G sharp minor pentatonic, except that first chord is G sharp major. And then the melody is like pretty clearly G sharp minor, but like, you know, again, in like Western tonal terms, I mean, this is a hot mess, right? But if you're like, it's in G sharp blues, then everything makes a lot more sense.
Well, at least that notion of having the minor third in the melody sort of superimposed over a major third somewhere in the harmony of the chord. Yeah, that instantly registers to my ears as blues. But seeing some comments to you and elsewhere on the internet, the idea of the B being the tonal center, I mean, I guess it's for a number of reasons why that doesn't sound right to me. The G sharp chord being on the first downbeat of the phrase being one of them, but I don't know, like did you try like doing anything in Ableton where you shifted the harmony to where the B chord was on the downbeat of the first phrase? I would wonder what that would do.
Yeah, I haven't. As a thought experiment, yeah, I mean, sure, if you put the B chord in like the metrically strong position, then it would feel like the tonic. But like that's because it's in the metrically strong position now, right? That like the idea of like the 5/1 cadence defining what key you're in, that's only true in like classical music and in popular music that descends from classical music, from European classical music. Like, you know, if in like one of my favorite examples is like Sweet Home Alabama, right? D7, C, G. On the page, like everybody's like, oh, you know, that's in G. No, it transparently is not in G. Like only on the page does it appear to be in G. You hear it, and D is obviously home, right? And G obviously feels kind of suspended and away from home. Like it doesn't matter if a 5/1 happens to be there if like the metrical relationships are that obvious. Oh my goodness!
And you're breaking my brain because I'm totally with you on on Old Town Road. I'm not with you here. I totally hear the G as where my brain feels a sense of like harmonic rest, and now I'm like trying to think about what chord the tune even ends on.
Well, it's in D, but it's in D mixolydian, right? Like it's not in major, like it's in D mixolydian. And so the fact that like that 5/1 relationship, it's a coincidence, right? It's not like structural.
Yeah, and this is my own bias showing here. I mean, to me, I'm hearing like, yeah, I guess if you analyze it like a 5/4/1, I mean, if you're thinking in the key of D, then it's a 1, it's a flat 7, and a 4, which, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, which I mean that's like ubiquitous in rock and in blues and in some of the kind of British folk music that also feeds into rock a little bit. Yeah, like there's nothing exotic about 1 flat 7/4, you know.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other examples where a flat 7 chord doesn't move up and instead just sort of gets dropped somewhere else. Because that's my frame of reference.
Hey Jude. Hey Jude, it's na F da da E flat na 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 na, and then to B flat na 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 na, and then back to F. Hey Jude.
Now see, I clearly hear that in F though, whereas in Sweet Home Alabama, that to me it's the third chord of the pattern.
That's funny. I mean, but it's the same progression.
Yeah.
Same harmonic rhythm
Right.
and everything.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, I mean, in Hey Jude, like that F doesn't feel as much like an F7. In Sweet Home Alabama, it's like definitely a D7.
Well, and doesn't it hang? Is it really the same exact harmonic rhythm? Hey Jude to me starts and ends on the one chord, doesn't it? Whereas I guess you don't get the.
Oh yeah, you're right. No, you're
that
right.
Must be why it's hammered home to me that's the key area.
Yeah, I guess so.
Fascinating. Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's like I can't deny that I have this, year and a half semester of music history, and then 2 years of, this like Western classical music theory. Like that's just like in my brain now, and everything I hear is tinted a little bit in that lens, as well as with the jazz that I have too. It's been interesting reading some of your posts, doing an analysis of Coltrane, because similarly, like I see stuff like that and I'm thinking like, okay, like I have been taught that chords function in certain ways and in certain contexts, and sort of how do you like, I mean, what is the ultimate aim of a music theory or a music history course, where to me, I feel like I'm always getting sharper the more and more I sort of assimilate lots of different harmonic understanding. Like I'm sort of like my general ear is bending my brain towards a tonal center that is sort of like an averaging out of all the different tonal theories that I have running around in my brain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the right way to think about it, right? Because like, so here in America, we have this strong European heritage, but we also have, all of this stuff from Africa or indirectly via the Caribbean and Latin America, and now we're starting to have like Asian cultures and, Indian culture. Like, you listen to hip hop, like there's so much Middle Eastern and like Indian kind of modality in it now. Like there's so much like Phrygian mode, so to me, it's like, yeah, it's there's going to be some conflicts there, right? Like in the same way that like socially, there are a lot of conflicts between these groups. I feel like music is definitely like a symbolic landscape where we're playing this stuff out for sure.
Yeah, well, and coming back to the same song again, just because this is like what I was reading this morning, it's like really quite hard to deny the potential racial politics that are going into, sort of like more institutionally looking at a song as country or not.
Sure.
And this is a huge part of your work, so I kind of wanted to talk about this today. Do you care how much I'm bouncing around?
Not at all.
So let me ask you this. Have you landed on a dissertation title yet?
That's a good question. As of this moment, it's hip hop and music education and music education and hip hop. And I want to find something shorter and snappier, but that's what it is right now. And I don't actually have a concise statement of what my research topic is, and often in dissertations you don't until 2 weeks before it's done. So hopefully it'll continue to converge as it goes along. But yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's until it's done. I guess how do you even say?
Right.
So this notion of like because I think in the same way that you look at how chords function as sort of an averaging out of different, the different musical experiences that someone has had, formal or not, you could equally say, well, what are the other non-harmonic style traits of a song that when you combine all of someone's musical outlook, like what are the ones that define one genre or another more heavily? So like the question is the song a country or a more hip hop song? Because I guess the thing is that Billboard at some point was, it was doing well on both the hip hop and on the country charts, and then Billboard sort of released a statement saying, "Hey, we've determined that this is actually not stylistically a country song. We're removing it from the board." So this is another area where I just kind of, and I'm using this song as a springboard for conversation here. Like you hear this as distinctly hip hop, but also distinctly country. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it doesn't fit into either of those categories neatly. I mean, I feel like if you just took the vocal and, if you heard it as an a cappella and didn't know anything else about it, you might say, oh, it's a country song. I mean, it's got a lot of auto-tune on it, so it's probably a current country song, but it's not like auto-tune is that unusual in current, commercial country, right? If you only heard the instrumental, you'd be like, well, this is obviously a trap song. Like, yeah, there's some banjo in there, but it's not exactly the first trap instrumental to sample banjo. It's an unusual timbre for trap, but it's not that unusual. And it's, but then, you put the two together and it's like, yep, that is a country vocal on a trap instrumental, boy. That is what that is.
Yeah. How many other instances of a trap beat being borrowed for something indisputably country did you come across when you were writing?
I mean, there's this, people have been doing country trap as a named thing for 10 years at least, but nothing has been a gigantic hit, right? It's if you're in Atlanta and you really have your ear to the ground, you've probably been hearing country trap all this time. But if you're just regular, let's say middle-aged white dad like me, yeah, you only really become aware of it. Now, I mean, I did start noticing, hey, country is starting to have rap verses in it, and it does seem inevitable that it's gonna have to make peace with hip hop at some point, just because that's what country does. It has to kind of absorb what's going on in the popular mainstream. That's what it's done its whole 100 years of existence, right? But yeah, Old Town Road, I was expecting more rap verses in straight up country songs. I was not expecting this kind of just 50-50 fusion.
If it had that, sure. Would you classify it more easily as a hip hop song?
I mean, so the word hip hop is kind of a fraught one, actually. That genre doesn't have clean boundaries either. I mean, for sure, Old Town Road, its instrumental has a lot of hip hop tropes, the 808 bass and all of that, and the 30-second notes and the hi-hats, but there's no rap in the song. He sings all the way through it. It's 100% sung and there's no rapping. And so if a song has no rap in it, can it still be a rap song? We're in new territory, right here, Yeah,
that's interesting. To me, hip hop encompasses a little bit of the neo soul R&B stuff that's out there right now. I think about Anderson .Paak, but he raps pretty frequently in his songs. Not always, though.
Yeah, and I mean, you could sort of look back at R&B and say, well, Mary J. Blige is kind of a hip hop figure, even though she's singing, because so much of the rest, aside from her vocals themselves, so much of her production and general aesthetic are coming out of hip hop. But yeah, I mean, it's gray.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess you sort of take these musical worldviews and you sort of because I find defining genre highly problematic. I mean, we live in a day now with YouTube. Everyone is exposed to everything. The lines are being blurred. So this is as much an important conversation as it isn't an important conversation, and that these are questions that people who look at music seriously have been asking forever and ever. And I mean, when does it start to matter that we do call a song country or hip hop or neither?
I mean, musicologically, I don't think it makes a tremendous difference, but I mean, commercially, journalistically, it makes a big difference, right? I mean, how are you going to market it? What radio stations are you going to play it on? Which stores at the mall are you going to play it in? That's, I feel genre descriptions are social descriptions, not musicological ones. So these social issues matter a lot outside of kind of purely musicological contexts. And so they should probably matter more inside musicological contexts too. But just from a pure music perspective, we can say, everything is a blend. Yeah, it has some hip hop elements, it has some country elements, it has some industrial techno elements because of that Nine Inch Nails sample. We don't have to we don't have to unambiguously sort it into one folder or another.
Right, because when I hear the song, I don't hear either of those genres. I hear a hit. Like it sounds.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Every much like a 2019 mainstream success that any song that you could consider pop, but that has influence of country and hip hop could be. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a surprise to me I would call it pop, if anything, and that's probably not the right word either.
It's not wrong. I mean, by definition, like it's the most popular song in America. Like it's pop. Like if it's not pop, nothing is pop. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, again, pop is one of those things that's like a very clear commercial identifier, but not a very clear musicological one.
Right, and so that's, I guess, where things get interesting because, we do have people who are responsible for marketing music, and that's why I just find this to be an entirely interesting one because it's like, okay, well, if, those who, I mean, let me ask you this too. I don't really know who's responsible for, I don't really know the inner workings of Billboard. Like what kinds of professionals are responsible for determining if a song belongs on that chart or not?
Oh boy, I mean, I don't have any special insight into Billboard either. I mean, I know a bunch of people who work in the music industry, and some of them are like have a lot of formal music background or a lot of performance background or songwriting, and some of them are business people who think music is interesting and maybe are avid fans but don't have any technical kind of knowledge of it. So there's quite a range, right? Yeah, it's hard to sort of represent. And the same goes with journalists. I mean, some music journalists are popular musicologists, and some of them are just good writers who happen to be interested in music, but don't, their skill is in writing, not in any sort of special knowledge of how music works.
Right. So at a certain point, you decide what is this genre and how is it going to be marketed to in this way or in this way. It's funny, I'm thinking to myself, like my mom keeps country music radio on in the car pretty much nonstop. And I have to ask myself, like, what would she say if I imagine there was at least a period of time where the song was coming on the country radio station.
I would think, yeah.
I would think. I don't know if it is still or is not, or it depends on the station or the state you live in, but I can imagine my mom saying, "Oh, I like the tune, I don't like the beat."
Yeah, well, and like I said, Old Town Road is not the first country song to have drum machines in it or auto tune or other kind of hip hop signifiers. And like the country music world is very divided about that stuff. Like, some people hate drum machines and think that they have no place in country music. And some people hate auto tune. And, there was a similar kind of thing in the 80s with country and how much like rock it should be absorbing. Should they be using synthesizers? Should they be using, like gated reverb on the drums? I mean, and there was a debate back in the 40s about whether country should use drums at all. Yeah. Like the Grand Ole Opry, like forbade drums, except they had to make an exception for Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. And then once the doors opened for Bob Wills, then other people started to be like, well, how come I can't have drums? But yeah, I mean, these things, like they're controversies that span generations.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And I think too, like the idea of, I used to joke with my mom who was really like not into hip hop or rap at all. As much as, we're sort of like reconciling these different stylistic traits, they are two genres of music that like sort of live, at least for a time, I think, live sort of in an interesting periphery to like more mainstream popular music.
Sure.
Or at least had some similarities in how they borrowed from and influenced mainstream popular music in a way that I feel like I used to, more than I do now, suggest that they were more similar to one another. The main difference now is I'm much more aware of like sort of the social divide between how you might look at how those two things have come together. But as far as like understanding their popular appeal, that's never been something I've had a hard time reconciling.
Right.
So how do these social issues play? I'm just going to kind of put this out there because this is like central to your work. Like, where or in what ways do these like social perspectives influence the difficulty at which you advocate for a music technology curriculum that is embracing of popular music today?
All right. So first of all, popular music in America is racialized. It always has been, right? Like if you want to, so this guy Stephen Feld, this ethnomusicologist back in the 80s wrote like in the United States, like popular is a euphemism for black. I think his exact phrase was it's a euphemism for Afro-American, but what he meant was black. And that's a gross oversimplification, but not an inaccurate one. You look at any of America's popular music over the last 100 years, you know, ragtime, blues, jazz, R&B, rock, funk, disco, reggae. I mean, all of these things start as black musics. And then later they find a white audience. And then maybe much later they become art, right? So jazz went from being not just a black music, but a very low class and disreputable black music, to now being like a classical music. And rock, I think, is well on the way to being canonized as an art music as well. Yeah, there's just no talking about popular music without talking about the racial politics of it. I do believe very strongly that popular music belongs in school if you're going to teach creative music making. And so music technology, like, it's a weird thing. Like, I don't think that's a subject that should exist as a subject. Like, when I teach, quote, music technology, unquote, I'm just teaching, like, production and songwriting. If you're going to teach production and songwriting, then you got to be working in the idioms that are meaningful to kids. Like, I mean, I suppose there's somebody out there teaching, like, classical composition to 8th graders, and God bless them, but that seems like the kind of an uphill battle to fight, you know? And I don't think that you have to sacrifice quality or rigor or ambition if you're going to work within the musics that the kids like. I mean, you know, within hip hop or R&B or country or rock or any of those things, you know, you can do those things intelligently and sensitively and well, or you can do them badly and, you know, thoughtlessly. But the same thing is true for writing string quartets, you know? You know, to me, like the sort of, and in my music tech classes, like, I'm style agnostic. Like the assignments are always, you know, make a piece of music using MIDI and software instruments and nothing else. But stylistically, you know, the kids can work in whatever genre or idiom they see fit, you know, and I get like an incredible variety of stuff. Like, you know, some of it's like pop and dance music, but sometimes I get like these prog rock epics, and sometimes I get like very experimental, you know, kind of avant-garde stuff, and most of the time it's just a weird hodgepodge of everything.
Would there be an objective to a particular lesson or unit where it would be more difficult for a student to show you that they met that objective by composing a string quartet? Or like I'm trying to think about what high level concepts, like if I imagine you're not like teaching the function of a flat 7 chord and then having them, I guess that's a bad example because I can't think of any context where that would not be applicable, but hopefully it makes sense what I'm saying. Like if you're teaching a highly specified musical theory concept, like would there ever be a situation where a student would be limited to what kind of style they were able to communicate that to you?
I guess we'll see. So one of the things I'm planning for this coming semester is when we talk about modes, when we talk about the diatonic modes, the assignment is going to be, I'm just going to pick a mode and a key out of a hat, and you know the student will have to come back and with a short tune that they've written in that mode in that key. So like, okay, you have to do A flat Lydian or whatever it is. And however they want to solve that problem, they can solve it. Like if they want to write like a sort of Mozart-y sounding thing on the harpsichord in A flat Lydian, if they can do it, great, you know. I think they would probably have an easier time in a sort of jazz or kind of abstract electronic sort of idiom, but it's not impossible.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that question. Okay, interesting. And you never grade on what I'll call creativity, because I'm sure that there are probably people listening who wonder, this gets asked a lot. I think we talked a little bit about this last time we spoke. Just the idea, like you're often assessing someone's ability to use the tools that they've been given. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, my assessments are pretty blunt. It's pretty much, did you do the project or not? So like, if you did the project, like you get full credit, whether I think your music is any good or not. And if you transparently, you know, did it in 20 minutes the morning it was due, I give you partial credit. And if you didn't do it at all, you get 0. So like my classes are a lot of A's and F's. No, because if you do the assignments at all, like you get credit, even if I think your music is garbage. Because it's hard to separate my personal whims from my like quote technical assessment. Um, you'll laugh. I've been teaching for many years at Montclair State University in New Jersey, which is like the world capital of metal. And I do not dig metal. It is just not my thing. And a lot of what the metal dudes, it's always dudes, what the metal dudes are writing sounds horrible to me. And so I always have to ask, like, hey, this phrase is 17 and a half beats long. Was that intentional or a mistake? And they're, if they say it's intentional, I'm like, well, it makes me disoriented and confused. They're like, good. Then I'm like, all right, well, I don't like that, but you set a goal and you achieved it. So whereas another student might be like, oh, I meant it to be an even length. I just screwed up in GarageBand.
Right. Yeah, I have a little bit of a metalhead strand running through me, so I have to laugh though. I mean, it's certainly a style of music that I've disassociated myself from more over the years as I've started playing it less. But even still, the metal I've played in more recent years is like, I was in a cello cover band that did like a bunch of Megadeth and Metallica, and that's not the kind of metal I think you're talking about right now. I mean, maybe you hate that metal too, but
no, I'm talking about that like kind of math rocky gent kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. I know the type. What do you think of animals as leaders? Do you put that in the same?
I could not. I'm gonna have to admit that I have no idea what they sound like at all.
You probably do, based on what you're describing.
Okay.
They're a little like their music is a little bit less. It's just interesting to hear. Like I don't think they're trying to throw you off your feet with anything that they do. It's got a little bit of that genty kind of math stuff going on. But it's just interesting how you can have a student like just sort of shamelessly tell you, you're like, I was trying to throw you off with that.
Yeah, I mean, like Mazel Tov, like that's great. Like, I believe in a diversity of, goals and stuff. I mean, like, so the guy who I studied jazz with as an undergrad, I mean, he was like he taught the Marsalises. Like he is a traditionalist. He sort of feels like jazz spans 1945 to 1961. And really it reached its peak with Duke Ellington in 1942. And, if you wanted to bring him some kind of piece of fusion or whatever, he'd be like, I don't know, convince me. I will not like it, but convince me, And that's definitely the attitude that I try to take.
Yeah, that's a fair one. I mean, have you been convinced by a metal composition so far?
Yeah, I mean, I, certainly respect like, I mean, I have a lot of friends who play metal and who are, huge metal fans, and I get it, boy. I totally get it. And, there's like stuff that I enjoy when I hear it. I'm just, my like kind of equilibrium is in a different place. So for me, but I feel the same way about like opera. Like I get it. I understand why people like it and I have an appreciation for it. It's just not what I throw on to unwind at the end of a hard day. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, it's funny. I have a spot for opera, but it's almost exactly like you're saying. Like it's never the context where I'm listening to it, like on my phone or in my house, if that makes sense. Like that's just not how I engage it as an art form. Which means, of course, that I listen to way less of it because I'm always enjoying it more when it's live. So it's just fascinating.
Yeah, or there's stuff, just like professional obligation. You just want to be up on what people like and, versus the stuff that you listen to for pleasure. Absolutely. Although, my daughter, who's 3, her favorite song in the world at the moment is a metal cover of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star by this Norwegian guy. What's his name? Leo something. I don't know. He's on YouTube. If you just search like metal Twinkle Twinkle, he's the first hit. He does like hundreds of metal covers of kid songs and they are wonderful. Oh God, they're so wonderful. And the videos are wonderful. If you have little kids and you're sick of those songs, that's a good way to refresh them.
Oh, here we go. Yep. All right. This is going to be the most research I have to do to make the show notes for a podcast ever.
Okay.
It's just full of great stuff. All right. I'll throw that link in there. Yeah, interesting. So coming to sort of back to genre, but also this topic of racial politics, we bounced back and forth. I guess it's maybe almost a year ago now. Is this when you were digging into the Chris Thile stuff?
Yeah. Oh boy, Christy. Yeah, that's been an ongoing thing. I just like a couple of months ago did like a conference presentation about that, and then wrote a paper about it that's hopefully going to be coming out this winter. So yeah, that's been fresh.
Oh, okay, good. So then we can talk about it. So
Yeah.
I there isn't a whole lot of music that like if I would try to define what it means to be a fan. I guess I'm as much a fan of Chris Thile's work as anyone. Like he's an artist who I follow all of the things he does and curious about him and his musicianship. I see him perform often, and I'm always aware of like what his latest project is. I guess I would consider that being a fan. I don't consider myself to be a fan of a lot of music because I listen to so much of it. But I might take something like hip hop, for example, as something that I listen to a lot, but there are not a whole lot of artists that I would consider myself to like follow quite like I follow his. So the fact that you were like up on this and are still up on this is just fascinating to me, because Chris Thile is someone who I think of as a musician who is sort of at the top of his, like as far as being technically proficient on an instrument is, he's sort of at the top of this mandolin scene.
Oh yeah, man. I'm a mandolin player. I don't think there's a better mandolin player in the history of the recording of that instrument than him. He's so clean, but it's like, it's not like wanky and technical either. It's like, he's so expressive, and yeah, I mean, I love listening to him play.
Yeah, his technique is always in service of some kind of musical statement that he's trying to make.
Yeah. His like Bach album, oof, man,
yeah,
beautiful.
It's killer. And the fact that, I mean, you can go on YouTube and watch him. He's like recorded each suite like in just like one continuous, like with the camera on without stopping in between takes of each movement, which is really impressive.
Oh yeah.
So he's someone who his work with Nickel Creek and Punch Brothers more recently, and his solo work. I mean, he's the only reason I would agree to go to the Telluride Bluegrass Festival last summer, and we saw him perform like 4 or 5 times just in one weekend alone, and great festival, by the way. So I follow him. I love his work. I have a real soft spot for artists who are committed to covering other people's music, which is something that he and a lot of his projects have done. And I think it defines sort of his appeal to me as a musician, like that level of technique.
Yeah, that broad, like that kind of ecumenical approach that he has.
Right, like he's just trying to take in, like there seems to be like, there's to some degree he's removed a sense of ego about it. Like he just wants to take in, especially with he's doing the Live From Here show now. They do this segment, Musical Birthdays. You can tell like he's just using this as an excuse to like learn as many different artists and styles as he can and get that band to sound good. Like he did, oh gosh, I wish I could remember the name of it. Solange, her birthday was on the day of actually the performance. They did a live taping at Telluride, and I wish I could remember the name. This is the thing about like not being a fan of a lot of music, because I don't know the names of any of the songs that I like. What are some of her hits?
For Solange, was it like Cranes in the Sky? Or like,
I feel like that must have been it. But they did it, but of course, because it's like this segment of the show, they did like 30 seconds of it. But it had like his all-star cast of all the folk people. Like, I don't know if you know Aoife O'Donovan or like Sarah Watkins from the... it had it had the whole Live From Here band, and they did that song in like for 30 seconds. And I was like, this is a really, really good cover. And of course, then it's over, on to the next birthday feature. But, he's just someone who is so interested in covering music and sort of like taking on all of these different styles and sort of assimilating them into his sound. So this sort of brings up like the topic of, I guess, I don't know if this is where you started, but you certainly did a bunch of research into this idea of white musicians, I guess particularly like on acoustic instruments, covering black songs, in particular with reference to Chris Thile covering Kendrick Lamar on, I guess it was before it became Live From Here. It was Prarie Home.
Yeah, it was his second time guest hosting Prarie Home Companion.
So he does, I guess he's on stage in this particular cover, him and a mandolin. And I think you said it pretty clearly. I mean, there are some problems with.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did this conference presentation about that performance, and I played the recording of it to this room full of like music education academics, and I just asked for a show of hands, like, so who thought that was a terrible idea? Most hands went up. I said, who thought that was fine, and who thought it was a good idea? And a couple of hands went up. I mean, a couple of people were like, look, like, I don't know from Kendrick Lamar, but that sounded, musically very accomplished and a really kind of brave and adventurous, thing for him to have done. It's a fascinating interpretation. And I completely agree with that. Like if we pretend that like social context makes no difference, I agree. I think his, interpretation of that song is musically very successful.
Before you go on, can I ask, yeah, I'm sorry. You're like in the middle of a thought, but can I just ask, I want to ask this question too, and I feel like it's related. You can certainly table it and come back to it. What do you think makes a good cover?
So there's a couple of categories of cover, right? There's like the straight remake, and like tribute bands, like the Fab Faux, like where you're just judging on how accurately they recreate the original. But then there are, like more kind of adventurous ones where you're taking something from one style and bringing it into another style, or you're taking something that's happy and upbeat and making it downbeat, or vice versa. And I mean, I love like a good, jagged stylistic shift in a cover. Like I like it when, you take like something that was maudlin and make it upbeat. And I like it when, it adds something new to your understanding of the song of the original. Like, you find the melancholy that was always there in that sort of cheerful pop song. You just weren't conscious of it before until you hear a sort of tragic version of it. Yeah, I mean, like these, it's kind of a trope for bluegrass song, bands to do like winky covers of non-bluegrass material. And, very often they're successful, and you're like, right, because, music there are things that sort of transcend, individual styles and individual genres, and it's nice to be reminded of that.
Right. Well, and to use the example of Chris Thile, his group Punch Brothers, they do a lot of covers, but I wouldn't consider them as cheeky. Like when they do Kid A by Radiohead, I mean...
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's no irony there,
in fact, it's strangely true to the original, given the instrumentation.
Yeah.
It's almost like they went for, like, how do we make this exactly on the set of tools that we have in our hands?
No, it's a remarkable accomplishment. Like, it's a remarkable feat of musical imagination to have done that, And I think it's cooler to do something like that than to just write a generic bluegrass song, you know what I mean? I feel like it takes more imagination.
So where did this performance, like, is it the fact that it was performed live that you feel is most problematic? I mean, there's a handful of things we could get into.
Well, okay. So my wife, who is a musician but is not like a real hip hop person, I was talking to her about the project, and she had never actually heard the original Kendrick Lamar song. And I played it for her, and 30 seconds into it, she's like, what in God's name made a white person think they had any business doing this song? And that's the big issue. It's not sort of whether like Chris Thile's cover is good or not. It's should he have done it in the first place? And the strong consensus on that is no. And, I mean, I played it for my NYU students last semester, and one of them was like, my skin is crawling. Like, this was such a bad idea. It's not just that it's a rap song. It's that it's about the Black Lives Matter movement and about the like specific autobiographical experience of police brutality and fearing police brutality, and also about the like lived experience of Kendrick Lamar, because the song is not all political. A lot of it's personal, like most of his material is. It's and this is a thing in rap in general, right? That it's an autobiographical music. It's like keeping it real, right, is a core value in hip hop. Like, you're supposed to talk about your own experience, your own thoughts and ideas, your own identity. And, a lot of like rap personas are fantasy characters or exaggerations, but it's still supposed to be kind of rooted in your experience and where you come from. And it's, it's not the only kind of music for which that's true, but it's definitely like the biggest commercial one in America for which that's true. Because like in rock, you know, you don't have to be singing about your own lived experience at all. Yeah. You know, it's totally acceptable to sing songs that have nothing to do with you or your identity or where you're from. And that's true in most popular styles. I mean, in jazz, right? Like some of the most iconic jazz musicians are famous for interpreting other people's music. Like, you know, and Ella Fitzgerald never wrote a song in her life, so far as I'm aware. Like, you're not sitting there listening to her being like, do you get a kick from champagne, Ella Fitzgerald? Do you? No, the whole idea is it's just this text that exists for interpretation. Yeah, hip hop is not that way, right? Like, rap songs just don't exist independently of their writers and creators.
Yeah, like very few, if any, rap cover songs. Like a rapper covering another rapper's song.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there are a couple exceptions. So like Mos Def likes to do covers of MF Doom a lot, but like he and MF Doom are like frequent collaborators and they're really close friends. It's not just like a random thing. Yeah, it comes out of this like close personal relationship that they have. Yeah, and in general, you just don't do it. Like rappers don't do covers. Quotes, yeah, for sure. Interpolations, absolutely. Samples, absolutely. References, doing a whole freestyle over somebody's instrumental all the time. But you're more likely to, in a rap concert, you're more likely to have somebody just play a whole song by somebody else, just the recording of it, than you are to hear them cover somebody else's song.
Yeah, what do you think he was going for artistically by covering that song? Because there's clearly like the chord progression and the rhythm, like it's obvious to me that he saw there like being some social implications. Maybe he was thinking like maybe like bringing it to a broader audience was important to do, but there also seems to be like a musical fascination that seems genuine with like, here are rhythms and chord progressions that are like alien to the mandolin. And I'd like to know what it feels like to be in those shoes from a musical perspective.
Ooh, and I get it, man. Like Kendrick Lamar is somebody who is just so good at his thing that like, you know, he's so intellectually ambitious and so kind of innovative that, you know, to me, it's like, how could you not be interested in his music? Like whether you care about rap or not, you know, he's like Coltrane, like, you know, you don't have to be interested in jazz to get interested in Coltrane, right? You know, or like Mozart, like I don't care about Baroque music much one way or the other, but like I love Mozart, yeah. And my interest in Baroque music is pretty much only in finding out more about Mozart, right? I don't care about it as a style. You know, and like Kendrick Lamar, like I don't listen to a lot of current hip hop, but like that guy, woof. Especially if you like jazz, like he's somebody who I think has internalized a lot more jazz than most current rappers, and not just as a producer, but like in terms of his own writing and the sort of unpredictability of his use of rhythm. And you know, he likes to stop and start phrases in odd places, and yeah, it just like it. I feel like he's like a really good entry point to hip hop if you're a jazz fan, actually.
Yeah, I agree with that a whole lot. So almost like the lyrical and autobiographical content of the song seems to be the major problem area in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, if it was just notes on a page, who cares, right? It isn't just notes on a page. And like, I absolutely think Christila is right to be interested in that song. And if he wants to like learn it on the mandolin and sing it for his baby, why not, right? Like, I mean, I learned that song. Like, I walk around the house and sing it to myself. But it's not just performing it in front of any audience. It's performing it in front of an older white audience that's unlikely to be familiar with the original and not really putting it in its proper context. Like if he had introduced the song by talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and talking about who Kendrick Lamar is and, you know, just situated it a little bit more, it would be a little bit less problematic. Might still be cringy, but like not so cringy. The other thing is he changed a lot of the lyrics. So there's a lot of curse words in the original, right? And he replaced them with non-curse words, which, you know, I get why he did that. But there's places where he replaced the N-word with the name of his son, Calvin, in the chorus, or in the pre-chorus rather. And it's good for a laugh when he does it. in his performance. Like you can hear the audience chuckling every time he does it because you're not expecting to hear the name of a white baby in the middle of a rap song. But the part where people are laughing is the part that's kind of the most heavy on the Black Lives Matter content. And it's real uncomfortable to hear a bunch of older, upper and middle class white people laughing during a song with that kind of content. I guess that to me is like the real problem. It's not that he did it at all. It's that he changed it without telling the audience that he was changing it, and substituted and changed it in a way that changed its meaning pretty substantially.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing. And sort of the reason I asked you a while back is what makes a good cover is I think in almost all of the types of good covers you mentioned, and in what I would define as a good cover, like always I feel like you are making a statement that is somehow like a new statement while in some way honoring the original. I just don't feel like that's happening in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a new statement, but yeah, whether it honors the original or not, I'm sure it was meant to honor the original. You know, I don't impute any sort of bad motives, but yeah, it definitely does not come across as honoring the original for sure.
So, I mean, I'm totally with you. I'm going to throw this out there just because it's something that I've heard in response to this topic. A lot of people might argue that music evolves through a borrowing, through precisely what we've been talking about kind of throughout this whole conversation. Like this idea of, you know, what happens to country music when it evolves by having an awareness of what a trap beat is. Like sort of moving things forward and evolving involves a certain amount of taking the ideas that always exist and then like, you know, changing them slightly and then spitting them out again. However, a musician who is so interested in growing musically by assimilating different musical styles, like how do you reconcile that idea with, and maybe this was just maybe it was a bad call. I think Chris Thile even said, like, didn't he say it was a bad call to perform that song?
Yeah, he said his enthusiasm got the better of him. But I mean, to your question, I mean, it's a good one, and you know, I certainly believe that music should evolve and that people should be like, you know, learning from things outside of their, you know, their own kind of little lane. But there's a lot of different ways to go about that, and hip hop itself gives you a lot of different models for ways you can do it, right? So like sampling, yeah, you can sample stuff, and you can do it in the context of a song that's still your own and speaking to your own truth and your own experience, but that is making reference to existing stuff, either indirectly by quoting it or directly by sampling it. You know, you can even do straight remakes. I mean, like, you know, the history of rap is a lot of taking existing songs and just lightly repurposing them. So like Biz Markie, right, who I love very deeply, his whole kind of stock and trade is taking familiar kind of cheesy songs, keeping the choruses intact and writing new verses that are about his own experience. So like, Just a Friend, right? Like his best known song, You Got What I Need. That's an existing chorus from like this kind of light pop song. And then he just writes new verses for it. It's unmistakably a Biz Markie song about Biz Markie's outlook and experience. But, you know, if you know the original, you're like, oh, snap, he took the chorus of that song and, you know, is using it to tell a story about himself. Yeah, it's not the same thing as doing a cover, for sure, right? I absolutely am in support of sampling and repurposing and even appropriating. But yeah, you got to think about power dynamics when you're doing that. You know, like appropriating upwards is fine. Appropriating downwards, not so fine.
Right.
And it's tough for a white person because, like, who are we going to appropriate from where it's not appropriating downwards? But, like, you know, there's a way to do it where you honor and acknowledge your sources, right? And there are white rappers who have done it successfully. Like, there are white rappers who are very well respected, in the hip hop community. So like the Beastie Boys, right, and Eminem. Because they bring something to the table, right? They're not just taking, they're also giving something back. And they do tons of sampling of black artists, but also sampling of white artists and, you know, sampling of everything in between. But the main thing they're doing is speaking to their own truths and, you know, yeah, just bringing a lot of new information to the table rather than just imitating, you know, something that already is there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. It's interesting. I try to put into context, given that I do follow the work of Punch Brothers, their new record that came out about a year ago has a track on it where there's like a lengthy portion of it where it's like spoken word rhythmically. And I have to do a second take. I have to ask myself, like, where is that coming from?
Well, there's like a long history of rap and country music of in the sense of kind of rhythmic speaking. I mean, like Hank Williams did a whole album, the Luke the Drifter album, where he just raps all the way through it. Yeah, like, hip hop artists don't own the concept of rhythmic talking,
Sure. It's just interesting, given that the Kendrick Lamar performance came first. I have to ask myself if that is not what was on his mind when he wrote it.
I wouldn't be surprised. And that's good. I think that's like a good kind of influence,
Sure.
Like, oh, right, we're allowed to rap in bluegrass. Like, we should do that. No, but it's a super interesting question. And I mean, yeah, and like all these things, there's going to be gray areas, and there's going to be stuff that's fraught. Like, I appreciate Christila for like sticking his neck out, and for trying something, just even though it wasn't successful. Like, I don't fault him for trying, but it is a good object lesson in that, like there's certainly many worse white rap covers than his, but there are better ways to do it too. For example, like writing his own song about the Black Lives Matter movement that even uses a Kendrick Lamar instrumental, or that samples Kendrick Lamar, or that quotes the chorus, right? But making it his song, rather than Kendrick's song, I think would probably have been better.
So this whole topic is at the forefront of your mind as you are in the process of writing a book. I don't know how much about the book we can talk about, but you tell me. I mean, I know that when we spoke earlier this week, you mentioned that this is all sort of coming together to you both in your dissertation, but also as you're writing a book about teaching music technology. And I'd love to know how, like, I want to talk about the book itself. Like, what is the scope of the book? What is it going to cover? But also sort of how this idea of racial politics has influenced your understanding of how modern music is, how popular music can be taught in an institutionalized education setting.
Yeah. So the book is, I'm the second author. The first author is Will Kuhn, who is the coolest high school music teacher in America that I'm aware of. And he has this massive, like production and songwriting program in his school in Lebanon, Ohio. And they do remixes, they do mashups, they write originals, they do DJ sets, they do music videos, they do live shows, they put out recordings. I mean, it's willkuhn.com, Kuhn, check it out. He's a visionary cat. And so he gets asked a lot, how do I do this in my school? And the book is, this is how you do this at your school. So it's a combination of, it's a lot of Will's lesson plans and project plans, but also some inspiration for how you develop your own projects, because, we want this thing to not be out of date 20 minutes after it hits the shelves. So there's like a vaporwave project in there, but, with the consciousness that like vaporwave will be over by the time you're reading the book, but hopefully you can use this as like a template for whatever the flavor of the month is coming out of YouTube, right? And also just talking about like the broader goals, like why should you be doing this in school? Like what is the value of having kids like create original music, and what's the value of working in the recorded idiom as opposed to the performance idiom? And that's more my area. So
it is in some respects comprehensive. Like, would you say that someone could be told by an administrator, hey, we're opening up a session of music technology at our school, and you're going to be teaching this in your schedule? Like, is this book designed to be like a start to finish method for that person to sort of get off the ground?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it talks about like what should you buy, and how do you take care of it, and how should you set up the room, and how do you advocate to parents and school boards and all that stuff. Yeah, that's exactly who it's intended for.
Awesome. So these are not necessarily, I guess it just depends on what kind of person is in that position, how much they need to have advocated that popular music is worth taking a deep dive into with all these new tools and curriculum. Like, that's sort of another facet of your writing. Am I correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's, again, to me, like, it all kind of flows from what is the goal? Like, what is the point of having a music tech program? Like, if the point is to do, musique concrète and to like teach kids about John Cage, fine, God bless, that's a goal, but if the goal is for the kids to express themselves creatively, then I don't see any realistic way of doing that except to let them work in the musics that are meaningful to them, and that they prefer and identify with. And I'm totally in favor of like broadening their horizons and encouraging, but like I think about like art class, right? Like in art class, you go to the museum and you look at art books and you look at slideshows of the great masters, but you're not just copying the great masters, you're drawing and painting from subject matter that you choose in styles that you choose, right? And it would be a pretty sad art teacher who said, no drawing anime characters in my class. Art teachers tend to be a little bit more like, fine, whatever gets you up the mountain. Yeah. If you're going to draw anime characters, let's at least talk about, anatomy and how to make your anime characters look more realistic. At least that's what my high school art teacher did. He was very cool. And so, same thing. If you're going to teach music as an art class, by all means, expose the kids to stuff they're unfamiliar with. But if they're going to be expressing themselves, they're going to want to do it in the styles that make sense to them and that they're familiar with, And I happen to think that there is a lot to, that, again, you're not really sacrificing anything by working within the hip hop idiom or the EDM idiom, that like these things have as much kind of richness and depth and complexity potentially as any other kind of music. It's really in, how do you use these things, Yeah,
I'm still thinking back to the idea you said earlier, much earlier, that you are not really ever teaching a skill where you're defining the musical style that the student is writing in. I'm really into that idea.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I don't have anything to tell, a bunch of like 15-year-olds about any of the music that they like. They know it much better than I do. What I can support them on is like, the technical side and, oh, you want to put a bass line under this? Let me help you identify the notes that are going to work, oh, you want it to sound like this recording? Well, that sounds to me like a square wave, and I know what a square wave is, so I can help you. But like, I'm certainly in no position. Like, actually, one of my best days of music teaching ever was when I went to Montclair State and was just like, guys, can you just explain to me what dubstep is? Like, I know what it is. I've heard it. But like, can somebody explain like what the definition of the word is? And we actually had a great hour and a quarter, like just figuring that out together.
Can you summarize it in less words?
So it's like, it, descends very indirectly from reggae, as it turns out. And it's, premised on this idea of like halftime and double time and triplets at different kind of rhythmic resolutions and using these harsh kind of overtone heavy, synth sounds and abrupt silences. And then we start in on all the sort of micro subgenres of it, which I couldn't care less. But basically, there is no clear definition of it, just like every other musical genre. So that was helpful to know.
Listening recently to the Skrillex record that was like the one that made him super famous. It's got Scary Monsters in the title, but then there's an and something else. I'll put it in the show notes. Just thinking to myself, like, man, these sounds are like, it's just one of those things where you think about the types of tonal stuff that is being explored on that record and just then like compare that against every breakdown of every like, you can't help but watch something like the new Trolls movie in theaters and like not hear a dubstep breakdown that sounds just like Skrillex in like the middle of the song. Do you know what I mean? Like,
oh, it's everywhere.
It's just like permanently now a part of our musical landscape in a way that's just fascinating to me.
And it's remarkable to me that like, thanks primarily to dubstep, now like the hook of a pop song can be instrumental. That like the dubstep breakdown is the real kind of, it's filling the function that the chorus did up until real recently. That's like amazing to me. Well, but this is my point, right? That like, in any of these popular idioms, I mean, you can do them in a dumb and shallow way, or you can do them in a deep and challenging way that, it's just kind of a container, and what you put in the container is really up to you and up to the students,
I love the book. It sounds so fascinating to me too. Does it have a title yet?
Electronic Music School Empowering Student Creativity is the working title.
When is there any idea like when this will be something people can get their hands on?
Well, we're writing as we speak. Hopefully going to be done by September because then we have to go do our jobs. But and then it'll, however long it takes to edit and print after that.
Yeah, summer is like the only time to really get meaningful writing done, I've found.
For sure. Well, I'm a full-time doctoral student, so it's a little bit different for me, but yeah, even so.
Yeah, well, you're just doing so much writing. The blog is like, just like I find myself like clipping everyone into Instapaper and then like periodically going back and like reading one and just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, there's just so much.
Well, all my academic stuff, all my dissertation, like it all comes. I'm like copying and pasting blog posts and then like putting footnotes in them. That's pretty much like the sketch pad for all the more kind of formal and organized stuff.
Well, that's even an interesting idea to me because, I mean, how precedented is that? Like, do you have a model for taking a blog and then adapting as much material as you have into a dissertation?
I mean, I'm not the first person to have ever done it. Like, I came at it in sort of this weird way. Like, when I went to grad school, I was 35 and I'd been kind of scuffling along as a musician and a bum with various day jobs for a long time at that point. And I had the blog. I had the blog for years already, just for like self-promotion and just for writing stuff for pleasure. And one of my day jobs was like technical and commercial writing. So it was kind of a portfolio for that. And, so it just, I was already kind of deeply enmeshed in this habit. And then when I went to grad school, it's like, oh, well, if I'm going to write a paper, I might as well stick it on the blog. If I'm going to be taking notes in class, I might as well just stick them on the blog. And I got a lot of positive feedback from that. And, then I got invited to, say, oh, hey, I've read a bunch of stuff on your blog. You want to write a chapter for this edited volume? So, it just kind of happened organically like that. It wasn't really a plan on my part. But I would recommend, knowing what I know now, I would absolutely recommend going into grad school with a well-developed blogging habit. Boy, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, do you find that like, because I have a blog and I blog about music and technology, but there's a point of diminishing return, like where I don't put the same amount of attention into the way I construct my words as I did my book.
Yeah, sure.
And that point of diminishing return I find is like pretty early when it's like just today I posted this post and it's in no way related to music, but it is an overview of some home automation stuff I've been geeking out about for the past year or two. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, you know what, this is like enough words that I should post it, but like I'm just going to keep pouring over it being perfect and I'm just going to put it out there. Like, do you find that the work is mostly done for you by the time that you adapt the blog material because you put in the time, or are you finding that you have to adapt the language or proofread it with more scrutiny?
Well, my blog tone has definitely been getting more formal over time, just as my audience gets to be more academic and it gets to be more of a sort of tool of my professional life, not just me and my whims. But it's still pretty casual, definitely too casual for just copying and pasting straight into a journal article. But I really like posting stuff before it's done. Like I really like to write 3/4 of something and then post it and then finish it like based on the feedback it's getting, like on Twitter and Facebook and in the comments. Like that Chris Thile post, I have been editing it for a year since it went up. So I keep adding stuff and keep responding to people's arguments and responding to people's questions and fixing, awkward phrasing. Yeah, it's always kind of in motion, and it's a little bit scary writing like an academic paper where it's like, oh no, 3 years from now, I'm not going to be able to update this. It's carved in marble now,
Yeah, that's a scary thought. Well, that's how I felt about my book. Also, having written about technology, that idea of like it even just being out of date the second it's on the shelves.
It's horrible.
It's horrible, Well, and I think it'd be interesting if the industry eventually went the way of software. It's like, okay, here's an ebook. You get version updates until there's a substantial enough revision that you pay a small fee to upgrade your book.
Yeah, that seems inevitable that that's going to happen, especially for anything remotely technological or technical, yeah. And, there's sort of a slow motion version of that with like editions, but yeah, like, I could see editions happening not every 10 years, but every, 10 days or however often people are finding stuff and fixing it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how slowly this has progressed. I actually, I have a weird fascination with, I wouldn't call this weird, just like maybe obsessive. I'm trying to digitize a lot of my library, and that goes for sheet music as well as books. And I found at a discount on Barnes & Noble, like at my old music history textbook from college, and while having sort of one source of musical history, one big text in my library is sort of problematic, I also, it was a formidable part of my education. I thought to myself, I would like to pay to have this digitized. But in the process of ordering this book, it was just interesting to get in the mail, like, you open the book, and on the back sleeve is like this website. You can, like, Norton has this website where you can go, like, they refuse to publish a Kindle version of this book, but you can go to a website where you log in with a username and a password, and you can, like, read it a page at a time. And you can listen to all of the embedded audio examples and read all of the scores that come in what was like an anthology of scores that you had to buy separate from the book back when I was a college student. But, like, I'm just thinking, this is bananas. Like, this is not the future.
Yeah. I mean, like the business models or, I mean, I don't have any profound insight into academic publishing, but yeah, it's, in terms of like actual utility, I'm like, or I could just write a blog post and embed YouTube videos in it, and note flight scores, interactive note flight scores. How awesome is that? Right there on the webpage.
I love those little embeds you do. Those are so fun. I didn't even know about that until I came across it on one of your posts.
So magical. Yeah, it's. I mean, I believe in academic writing as this, like, it's getting a lot, it's trustworthy because it's scrutinized so closely and passes through so many, pairs of hands, and, has to be vetted so thoroughly before it can, be sort of added to the sort of canon of official knowledge. And that's really important. But, as like a reading experience, it's nice going on the web and just being able to listen to the thing that they're talking about.
Yeah, how does that translate? Because I'm obviously not doing this every day. Like, I don't even know how to cite a YouTube video. I would imagine that's someone has to type in a URL if they want to go to what you're referencing.
So, like, in an academic paper, I mean, there is, like, now an official way to cite a YouTube video, and yeah, you put the URL in there. I mean, for the blog, yeah, I'll just embed it and also put text links. Yeah, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, it's just weird to think that, like, no one will, your work will never be more accessible than it is on your blog. It's just so easy to read through. Like, one of my favorites is your why hip hop is interesting post. I mean, that's just rich, full of great YouTube embedded videos, and you've got all those note flight examples of I think that's the same one where you do Famous, right? Is that the same post where you break apart the Kanye West song?
Well, and I did turn that into a journal article. It's in the Journal of Popular Music Education in their hip hop issue. And the version of it that's in the journal is better in the sense that it was edited with many pairs of beady eyes and is a lot tighter, and it's a better piece of scholarship. But yeah, I mean, you can't listen to the music in the Journal of Popular Music Education, which is a bummer.
Totally get it. In my feeble attempts to make this a little bit of a more tightly branded experience, I do have some segments I'm toying with, and I'm gonna ask you some segment questions in a little bit. But I don't want to, like, diffuse anything we talked about today that you feel like is not fully resolved, or if there are any topics you want to talk about or anything you want to promote while you're here.
Oh boy, no, I think we hit it.
Yeah, we are all over the place, but I'm happy that we got to talk about everything I had on my list. I do have, like, I'm thinking, like, to me, thematically, what is interesting to me is, and it's weird because we've been talking about tools and about music this whole episode, but as sort of like trying to have something that a listener is, like, expecting from me every time I publish one of these, I'm rolling with currently the idea of an album of the week or a song of the week, and then an app of the week, because these are common themes on my blog.
Okay.
Should have prepared you, I guess, in advance, but, like, do you, like, you're the kind of person who, when I see you at a conference, or, like, when I watch, when I, like, read your blog posts, like, I'm just very aware of the tools people use for their work. Like, I know there's a couple things you use that are that I use frequently, like OmniGraffle for making graphics. You use Scrivener for writing.
Oh, the best. Yep.
Like, do you have any apps or any tools that are a part of your creative workflow right now, that other than obviously Ableton, that you think are worth talking about?
I mean, no. I feel like, Scrivener for writing, OmniGraffle for visuals, and Ableton for audio. That's the big three. That's what I use. I mean, I use Mendeley for keeping my academic citations organized, and I don't recommend it all that highly, frankly. Audacity for weird file formats. That's about it.
Does that just kind of convert anything to anything?
Yeah.
It's useful. I should probably install that. And like, is there any music that's just gripping you lately? Like an album or a song?
All right. So I'm looking at my iTunes here. I'm going to sound like an egomaniac when I say this, but I listen to a lot of my own stuff because the reason I make that stuff is just to play in my house for myself and my kids. And so I don't know a less egomaniacal way of saying it, but yeah, my own remixes of things. This week we're listening to a lot of Whitney Houston and a lot of Cyndi Lauper. My kids are into it and I'm into it, so there you go. We're listening to Old Town Road a lot, which is fine. When my kids are not in the room, I'm listening to a lot of Kendrick Lamar, actually. The Untitled Unmastered album, it's amazing. Even though it's just stuff left over from To Pimp a Butterfly, it's still pretty ridiculous, especially if you like jazz. There's a lot of jazz in there. Yeah, that's what's been in the rotation lately.
That's a great album. In fact, you mentioning it is reminding me of how little I've listened to it. So I'm going to like dust that off.
Yeah, track 5. That's my jam. Untitled Unmastered 05.
I love it. And are there any places that you would direct someone to finding you on the web? I know you're on Twitter. I'll link that in the show notes. You've got your blog, of course.
I mean, SoundCloud, Facebook, those are the big ones. LinkedIn, I guess. But yeah, really Facebook and Twitter and the blog. Those are the big three.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'll add those to the show notes along with as many of the references from our conversation that I can. This really was a reference-full discussion, so I'm excited to. I kind of nerd out about making the show notes. I guess my new move to Libsyn will tell me how many people are like downloading the episode, but hopefully for the amount of work that usually goes into uploading the URLs, there's a few people out there. Ethan, thanks for being here today.
My absolute pleasure.
And I will hopefully run into you again, hopefully at a Noodle Cat or an equally delicious establishment in the near future.
Solid.